Welcome back. This is part 2 of our video lecture series on the compare-contrast essay. I apologize if you hear my cat or if you hear honking or weird noises outside. I don't know what they're doing out there. They're fixing something. So sorry about that if it comes up. So now we're going to talk about pre-writing, and what we were talking about before is kind of some basic information about what you do in a compare-contrast essay or compare-contrast paragraph. You'll do it in a compare-contrast essay later. Now we want to talk about what you do before you actually start writing it. So the first thing we want to look at is the prompt. So what is the prompt asking you to do? Compare-contrast prompts will always ask you to compare, contrast, or assess two or more of something. You will see these a lot. They are the backbone of many questions in college. So you're going to be looking for keywords like compare, contrast, similarities, differences, alike, apply, or relate. Those words normally indicate that you're looking at a compare-contrast paragraph or essay. Once you've got your compare-contrast, you want to start developing a topic. So you want to analyze the prompt. What are you being asked to compare or contrast? What do these things have in common? What are they different? And you can use pre-writing strategies to come up with possible details before you start reversing the prompt or writing a thesis statement. So some good pre-writing strategies are lists, T-charts, and Venn diagrams. And I think I put those at the end of this section, and I'm not really sure why I did that. But I guess we can just go ahead and skip over to that so that we can look at some pre-writing strategies. So a T-chart, what is a T-chart? Well, it is when you take a sheet of paper and you write a line across the top and a line vertically through it to make a T. And you often use them to show differences. So we might do apples here, oranges here, and then we would list traits of apples and oranges to how they are different. We might do something here on how they're similar. Venn diagrams. This is a Venn diagram. So a Venn diagram are those two circles that intersect. And where you put what's similar, where the circles intersect. So between mammals and fish, you are both vertebrates, they have backbone, they both have a skeleton. Some differences: the mammals are warm-blooded, have hair or fur, have live births, breathe with lungs, and most live on land, whereas fish tend to be cold-blooded with scaly skin. They tend to hatch from eggs, breathe with gills, and live in water. And you can see that these are compared. We've got type of blood, we have type of covering, we have method of birth, we have how they breathe, how they live. So there's a good basis of comparison or grounds for comparison here because you can compare those things. So let's talk about grounds for comparison, and then I will go back and talk to you about writing the topic sentence. So the first thing you want to do is choose two things that are mostly similar with a few differences. It's easier to do that than to do two things that are very different with a few similarities. That gets easier to do with practice. First, you want to list the main similarity, and then the categories for the differences and examples for the differences. You also want to decide what you want to accomplish, because ultimately that's going to help you decide what qualities to focus on. So what do you hope to show by comparing these things, or what do you want your reader to learn or think after reading your paragraph? And we'll look at some examples of grounds for comparison that are good and some that maybe aren't as good. So fruits and vegetables, these are probably a good comparison. They're pretty alike. So they have some pretty important similarities. They both grow on plants. They're both edibles. But they also have some good differences. You normally cook vegetables and eat fruit raw, so you have your method of consumption there. Vegetables are usually used in meals, in fruits and desserts, and vegetables can be almost any part of the plant. Fruits are normally only, fruit. So those are some things that you might compare on those two. There are some other ones on this Venn diagram up here. So some similarities are that they often can both be eaten raw or cooked. They tend to be low in calories, high in fiber, and nutritious for both fruits and vegetables. They taste different. Fruits and vegetables are from different parts of the plant. Fruits often contain seeds. Vegetables mostly, it depends. Fruits tend to grow on trees. Vegetables tend to be different parts of the plant. So you can see that that's a good grounds for comparison. They're two items of the same group. They're both products of plants. that are eaten, but they have enough differences that you can analyze them. Another good example would be comparing two models of cars. So let's say we were comparing the Yaris and the Rio. So they're both economy cars, but some differences. The Yaris has different miles per gallon, 32 city, 40 highway, whereas the Rio is 33 city and 41 highway. They have different horsepowers. The Yaris is less powerful than the Rio. The Yaris has 106 horsepower. The Rio has 120 horsepower. The Yaris is also more expensive at $18,000 compared to the Rio's $16,000. They're made in different countries. The Yaris is made in Japan. The Rio is made in Korea. And they have different appearances. Yaris is available in a hatchback, and the Rio looks more like a sedan. They may have these differences, but they're good grounds for comparison because they're both economy cars. Apples to oranges, surprisingly, despite the saying, you're comparing apples to oranges, are actually two things with a really good grounds for comparison. They're both fruits with seeds that grow on trees, and they have enough differences for us to explore them. Oranges and apples have different colors. Oranges can be seedless. Apples typically have seeds. Oranges have a thick peel. Apples have a thinner peel. Oranges tend to grow in tropical region. Apples tend to grow in colder climates. So there are enough similarities and differences here that they would be a good grounds for comparison. So what's not a good grounds for comparison? Well, you don't want to necessarily compare an apple to an apple, because what are the differences that you're going to explore? There needs to be some common ground, but not the same. Similarly, you don't want to compare a golfer to a car. What would you compare there? They're too different for us to form a good ground of comparison. I saw this in a paragraph last semester where someone tried to compare a famous player of one sport and a famous player of another sport. Well, they are both players of sports, but because the sports they play are so different, everything else about how they play is going to be different too. And so you're going to end up with too much to juggle to do in one paragraph. Better options would be to compare two players of the same sports, or to compare two different sports. So now that we have an idea of how to form a grounds for comparison, let's go back and talk about how we create our topic sentence. And I'm sorry this PowerPoint is out of order. I had put it in this order originally, and then as I was doing the video, I decided a better order would have been better. I may go back and rearrange it before I post the PowerPoints. So to create a topic sentence in a compare-contrast paragraph, or a thesis statement in a compare-contrast essay, you want to start by reversing the prompt. So X and Y, which would be the two things you're being asked to compare, seem similar in that. And then you can add in your evidence, but they are actually different because, and then explain that. Explain what three things are different because, A, B, and C. In a compare-contrast, you really do want to follow this format. You want to make sure you have these three blanks that you fill in. They'll really help to guide you, and they'll make writing a thesis when we get to that part in a few weeks a lot easier. So how do you do it? This was an objective. Now let's say you want to evaluate. Let's say that you want to decide what of two things is better. So you're going to start the same way. You're going to start by reversing the prompt, but then before you add in your evidence, you're going to add in an evaluative statement. So X and Y have blank, the similarity in common, but X is better because of, and then have your three reasons, X, Y, and Z, or A, B, and C. Cats and dogs are both pets, but cats are better because they're more independent, require less grooming, and are better for small houses. That was just randomly off the top of my head as I was looking at my cat sleeping. But that kind of thing. So that's two ways that you can create a topic sentence, depending on whether or not you want to do an objective one where you're not saying which one is better, or an evaluative one where you are saying which one is better. So let's go ahead and get to the next section. We've talked about all of this. Then once you have your grounds for comparison, you've done a little bit of pre-writing, and you've written out some options for your evidence, you want to decide on a structure. And again, it's really important that these be structured. If they're not structured, then they get really confusing and they're nearly impossible to write. So compare contrast paragraphs often involve a lot of information. You're often, even if you're only selecting a portion of that information, it's still going to feel like a lot to juggle. And the more organized you are at the beginning, the easier it is to write, and the easier it is for the reader to understand it. You need to decide between whether you want to use a point by point or a subject by subject structure. So those two structures we talked about in the last PowerPoint. And then you want to write a quick outline to help you envision how the paragraph will come together ultimately. And then once you've done that, you'll be ready to start writing. We're going to go through an example essay together, or example paragraph together in just a moment. I use very similar PowerPoints for 101 and 100 on compare contrast, and I use something very similar when we get to the compare contrast essay down the line. So I kind of sometimes they overlap a little bit in my head. So I'm going to stop this here, and then we're going to talk about the example essay when I come back for part 3.